Can't actually see it.
We've got 40 people coming in.
Oh.
Good evening, everyone. We are just letting participants in, so please bear with us while people join. Just to let everybody know, we're just letting more people in and we'll be starting in the next minute or so. Thank you everyone for waiting so patiently. We're just letting in some more people to join us this evening. Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to Plantlife Spring into Action series, Saving the Wildflowers of the Brecks. This evening, this session is being recorded and afterwards you will be able to see the recording on our YouTube channel. Your mics are muted, so please don't worry about that. We won't be able to hear you throughout the session. If you do have questions, we have a Q&A and you can see all the details of how to access this on our welcoming slide. So please put any questions you have in there and we'll be answering them at the end. There's also a chat function. So if you have any questions about Zoom, please write any questions you have in the chat and myself and another colleague will be there helping anybody who has any issues. So I would like to introduce you this evening to Jo Breckland, who's our conservation officer and been with Plantlife for the last 5 years. And she's also coordinated the Breckland Flora group. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you ever so much, Kate. Thank you all for coming to this today. I'm hoping this is going to get activating. Yes, to this talk. I really appreciate you giving your time and interest. And the title, Saving the Wildflowers of the Brecks. To me, that sums up an image of a knight in shining armour riding in to save Brecks plants. The story is, as ever, much more complex than that. As Richard Evans, a farmer I shall quote later, said, "The work today is so urgent, we need to get on with it now, but we need it to last 200 years and more." I want to give you an insight into Brecks flora and Plantlife's work in the Brecks by first, for those of you who don't know the Brecks or Brecks flora, taking you on the journey by which I discovered and got to know the Brecks and the hidden beauty of its stunning flowers. Then I'll give a few examples of work that's being done to help them flourish and the relationships that we're building across the Brecks that make this work possible. Some of you who've come tonight will know the Brecks much better than I do, and I bet you'll have been part of the history of Brecks conservation that I'm describing. And I want to acknowledge that all I'm saying is based on all that you have given to this work. So, welcome to the Brecks. I first became aware of the Brecks, as I expect many do, as a place to drive through, up the A11 or the A1065 to Norwich or the North Norfolk coast. I always noticed a particular row of twisted pines by the roadside, usually seen at dusk. And this gave me a feeling that I was passing a place that was very other. Except for those in the know about this remarkable area of the country, I think I was not alone. One of the actions of a recent Heritage Lottery project was to put up road signs, "Welcome to the Brecks." These gave a message that this is a place with a specific identity and a place to come and celebrate. And indeed it is. I then got to know the Brecks instead of just passing through it much better after working 7 years with the RSPB, protecting and monitoring stone curlews, working closely alongside farmers and on the heathlands, particularly in the southern part of the Brecks. Spending hours on the land and the heaths, days and weeks, I got to know the flinty, chalky, sandy soil on which they nested and of which the Brecks is made. I also got to know many farmers and farm workers, and I discovered that this is a land that grips you. I'm of course following in a line of much more esteemed people than myself. Back in the 17th century, John Evelyn, a traveller and author, wrote that passing through the Brecks, he felt like he was going through the sands in the deserts of Libya. And he said, "I wish I could convey the incredible beauty of that lonely country." In 1925, a bit more recently, W.G. Clark, in his very classic book, Breckland Wilds, wrote that few of the lowland districts of England have more striking individual characteristics than the area known as Breckland, which comprises about 400 square miles. And he said, "Those who have come under its spell are ever after its slaves." Well, I think I've become one of those. I fell in love with Brecks flora specifically while I was working as a volunteer for Tim Pankhurst, who's Eastern manager for Plantlife, one winter. Here are some of those plants. While you listen to me, you like to think which of these species grows only in the Brecks in the whole of the UK, and indeed which one grows only in the Brecks in the whole of the world. But back to Tim's office, which was in that time a freezing room in the Botanical Gardens in Cambridge, freezing yet oozing history. I met the special plants of the Brecks through working on a database, which was a compilation of records put together by Helen Dobson from UEA, a work of love in itself. And she'd compiled all the records she could possibly find from anywhere of 28 Brecks species, flora species. Working through those, I got such a sense of history, and I found myself striding the Brecks with, for example, Sir John Cullum back in 1775, when he was finding Veronica verna, which is the little blue flower in the centre of this slide. He found it 1785, and he says, "In sandy grounds near Bury in Suffolk, scarcely above one plant in one place." And then again, he found it again in 1776 in a field of rye near Icklingham, 7 miles from Bury. And then 1805 in the rye at Westow and Icklingham. And when I was putting this talk together, I'm at the moment going out surveying for Spring Speedwell, Veronica Werner, and the astonishing thing is what struck me this time, because I know the plant better, I know these records better, is the one place where there's an introduction of Veronica Werner where it's really thriving, it's doing so under rye, and I'll show you that later. Anyway, going through working on that database, I discovered how significant the Brecks is for flora. 8 species of flower grow only in the Brecks in the whole of the UK, and another 2 species only grow at one other site. So of the flowers that you can see now, all of them but red-tip cudweed only grow in the Brecks in the UK, or at only one other site. Military orchids at one other site, and the proliferous pink has indeed been found at Teesside just in the last couple of years. The plant that's only found in the Brecks in the whole of the world is perennial Norwal, which is the bottom right. I find it absolutely stunning that just 20 minutes up the road from where I live, there is a species which I wouldn't find anywhere else in the world. Well, working on the database, I was then dying to get to see some of these plants. And Tim took me out indeed to see Spring Speedwell, the one in the middle of your slide. He knew where it would be, and yet still 20 minutes on our hands and knees crawling around a sandy pit before we found it. And there it was, flower with the deepest blue. And after this session, have a look at a 1p piece and have a look at the O where it says 1, the O of 1, because that's how big the flowers are of this gorgeous little speedwell. I was pleased when I saw it, but I then looked at it through a hand lens. And I know when I teach people to use a hand lens now, I know when they've got the plant in focus and it's working, because they go, oh, well, that was me when I saw the speedwell through the hand lens. It was beautiful and took my breath away. Inevitably, as I was working, oh, sorry, there's the better picture of the spring speedwell next to the penny. Inevitably, as I was working and analysing this data, I realised that I was studying decline. Both of sites, and those blue bars are all former sites, number of former sites where Spanish catchfly used to be found and is no longer found. The green is where new sites were found, and the red are current sites. But you then have to drill down and have a look at it closer, because you then begin to discover that actually the number at current sites are very much less than they used to be. There are few places where Spanish catchfly would look as thick as a hay crop now. Fingered speedwell, Veronica triphyllus, is only left now at 3 sites, and one of which has dwindled in the years I've known it from about 30 plants to 2 in 2019. So that was how I got my introduction to Brecks flora. I was incredibly lucky to get involved when I did, because in 2010, the results of a massive Brecks biodiversity audit was published, and that showed how special the Brecks is for numerous species, butterflies, moths, beetles, birds, as well as plants, with 28% of the country's rare species in this very small part of the country. So why is this? Much is down to Brecks geology. Now, a colleague I work closely with at Natural England, Pip Mountjoy, had the foresight when she was out using a drone to take photos of her rabbit work to get this photo taken. This is of a piece of restoration land now managed by Norfolk Wildlife Trust near Weeting, and it had just been deep ploughed, so it was bare, and shows the geology of the Brecks so clearly. Glaciation, this is the result of glaciation, which brought in masses of gravel and sand, which overlaid the chalky bed, and then with erosion and so on, it produced what is known as Breck stripes. Lines of chalk and of sand that lie really close to each other, and you end up with sand that's chalky, chalk that's sandy. And the flora that developed had to be able to live on this desperately poor soil, poor in terms of nutrient content. There are also piles of sand. The village of Santon Downham got buried in the 1700s after a great big wind blow, and it got buried in the dunes. The twisted pines that first struck me are symbolic of the fact of the winds that blow through the Brecks and the severity of the wind. The climate here is extreme. Santon Downham, the same place, often features on maps, weather maps of the UK, as the hottest place in the country in the summer, and it can also often be the coldest place in lowland England. So, and the Brecks is supposed to be able to have frost in every month of the year. On top of that, it's the driest place in the country. So put that phenomenon together and you end up with, as W.G. Clark said, a flora that in few districts in England have more fascination for the botanist than that of the Breckland. Now, the Brecks audit, when it was done, showed that so many of the rare species depended on the presence of bare and disturbed ground. For centuries, this ground had been so poor, it could only be farmed every so often. So it would be farmed and then left fallow for 10 years, farmed again. And hence it's got its name Breck, from Breckland, or that's what's thought. And for quite a long time, it had been thought that Brecks heaths that remained were so precious that they shouldn't be touched. But the Brecks audit showed us the real importance of disturbed bare ground and the need to do that intervention that so many of the plants and other species had adapted so well to. So that's the Brecks, but we've had a mass loss of heathland in the 20th century. That's partly due to the land was so poor that when they were desperate for wood following the First World War, they planted an enormous amount of pines right across the Brecks, thinking that it was poor land of no use and no worth. Agriculture has also developed, and once they were able to do mass irrigation and inputs of fertilizers, the Breck soil is excellent for growing vegetables, which have really good cash crop value and of course very good food value. The building of houses lost further traditional Breckland. So the fingered speedwell that I spoke about, that it was growing in the thousands on the agricultural land on which the housing development on the right was built. A remnant was put on the bank, and then trees were planted on the bank, and that was the mistake, because when I saw it first in 2010, it was a very bare area still, and there was plenty of fingered speedwell. The trees have grown up, they now shade that area. It's no longer, no longer gets the hot sun, coarse vegetation has moved in, the leaves have fertilized the ground and so on, and it's now dwindled to a couple of plants. It can keep being gardened, it can keep being cleared, but really there's not much long-term hope for that particular area. So there are sort of visible factors and then invisible ones. There's climate change, hot summers, but we also have long periods of wet, damp springs, wet, damp autumns, again, which encourage coarse vegetation. Nitrogen deposition, the same. Stabilization of the soils, which was a really important factor. They put in the lines of pines, the Scots pines that are so classic of the Brecks were put in to stop the sand blow. But that has also stopped the environment in which these plants had adapted to survive in. And then in the last, I suppose, 8 years, we've lost rabbits from the Brecks. And the loss is stunning in terms of when I started out in the Brecks in 2010, 2012, rabbits were just everywhere and you took them for granted. I've been out the last few weeks, several days on the trot, and I haven't seen a single rabbit. Unbelievable, and just shows how what you take for granted can disappear in the blink of an eye, really. So in the context of this, what to do to make sure that the precious flora isn't lost forever and that it flourishes with all the benefit to the invertebrates and the other life that depends on it. First, our work is based on all those who've gone before us, who've tirelessly worked to protect special sites, to record and to show everyone how special this flora is. But there was a major problem in that with the retirement of key recorders of Brecks flora, there was now a huge gap in the recording of this flora, without which it was impossible to know what was going on. I can only say to you, there are 3 sites at which there is the fingered speedwell, because we set up the Breckland Flora Group to do that recording. Often these species aren't easy to find or sometimes to ID, you know, as witnessed by Tim and I crawling around on our hands and knees for 20 minutes before we found the spring speedwell, even though the area we were hunting in was small. But before we started doing any intervention work or even knowing what was the important thing to do, we needed to know what was going on. Forestry England, Natural England and Plantlife put their heads together, and working with 2 exceptional consultants, Julia Masson and Chris Roberts, who were employed to do much of the hard work of doing it, they set up the Breckland Flora Group. And I got the good fortune to be its coordinator. I should say at the bottom right there, you've got a photo of James Simmons, who's the warden, NWT, Norfolk Wildlife Trust warden at Weeting, who is just the most superb naturalist, and we're very lucky to have him as part of our group. Soon we had 40 members, each responsible for a site or several sites, where they systematically record the presence or absence of any of 35 the specials of the Brecks flora. Now we've got regular maps, photos, descriptions, counts, we can get our handle on what is happening with these species. Landowners welcome us, and our interest in the species on their land encourages their work and their efforts for these species. So here you've got Supinel with smooth rupturewort in the forest. Marie has found all those plants of fine-leaf sandwort. Matt Blissett, who was with NWT at the time in Norfolk, was counting military orchid, and David Davis was with Spanish catchfly. The results that these members gather are used both immediately and for long-term conservation planning. As an example, while Thetford Forest took a huge amount of land area of the Brecks, now its rides, the areas between the trees, provide precious relict heathland, which has actually been saved. That's actually what Supinel is. She's on a forest ride at the moment. It hasn't been fertilised, it hasn't been sprayed, no pesticides. And also it gets disturbance from the forestry vehicles going up and down it. Forestry England use the records of the species that we collect to ensure populations aren't damaged during forestry works, and to plan their management of forest rides, including putting in rotivated wavy strips to mimic the irregular farming of before and provide bare ground needed by flora and other species. Natural England use our results to understand what's happening on SSSIs and support species recovery projects. To go to specific examples of species work that we've done recently through Shifting Sands, which is the Brecks part of Back from the Brink. Plantlife has focused on restoring the fortunes of 2 species. One is this really precious perennial norwal, the one that's only found here in the whole of the world, and field wormwood is the other one. The largest population of perennial norwal is found at REF Lakenheath, but it only remains at 2 other native sites, by which I mean sites at which it naturally grows without having been planted there by humans. It was successfully introduced to 3 sites in the late 20th century, so that means it's found at 6 sites, but at 2 of these it's in numbers less than 30 plants. So that's not really very much for such a precious plant. I really like the fact that its Latin name is prostratus, and I feel like it deserves this sort of adoration of being knelt to, but actually it's just because it's so small and Bill Sutherland there was trying to get a photograph of the plant. So for its benefit, after a great deal of work trying to find the most suitable sites, with a mix of lottery funding and work in kind provided by Elvedon Estate, with whom we work closely, we were able to turf strip at 3 sites, which means taking off the top level of nutrients that's accumulated through nitrogen deposition. The site you can see here was old forestry site, so leaf drop and that kind of thing, and also the loss of rabbits, which has prevented the creation of bare areas. So we turf stripped this area, and then with plants grown from seed off REF Lakenheath, we introduced 20 plants at each site, and Breckland Floral Group members are now closely monitoring these. At one of the sites, we've now got 60 plants and 80 seedlings. And what's particularly lovely, so this member has been photographing the plant through the stages. This is the same plant top left, I think in May, and then you go to July, and then you go to September, the next one, and then the bottom big one is December. And the exciting thing about that one is that there are little plants that have seeded or have grown from broken off branches alongside. And this is one of the interesting things looking at the ecology of these plants. It may be that they've grown to adapt to being cut off by the very sharp sand, which when it blows, I mean, it can cut an onion field to bits. So it can cut these off, and then if they land in damp ground, maybe they're able to reshoot. This is something we need to understand about this plant. The other exciting thing about this turf strip is that it's already benefiting other species. So I went with Sharon Hurl of Butterfly Conservation, and she took me to do a lunar yellow underwing larvae count. And that's in the top right of the screen, the wiggly thing here, which I hope my arrow you can see, that is a lunar yellow underwing larvae. They like bare ground and then really fine grasses, festuca, and then they'll, at night, they come up and sort of hang out in some question mark or S shape. No one quite understands why, but that's what they do. Once they've grown larger, they move to denser areas of denser grass. And we counted we did a count for 30 minutes, and we basically counted 1 a minute, 30 of them already in what is a very newly created turf strip. Very exciting. We've also done work at London Road Industrial Estate, which for ages was the only native site, only natural remaining site for field wormwood, which is the huge bushy plant you can see in the bottom left. When we started work in 2016, we then, one of our Breckland Floral Group members found another site for this plant in Mildenhall, and then Tim Pankhurst of Plantlife, he found 1 plant growing in a little car park. So that makes 3 native sites. But this one was in a really bad way. It had got badly overgrown by sand sedge, and it's based at an industrial site where in the 1950s, this plant was flowering all over Brandon. It was in the caravan park as well. And so when they set up this industrial site, they left 1 unit effectively as a little reserve for this plant. So it got badly overgrown. 2018, there were only 2 flowering plants left and 100 non-flowering. With shifting sands, we were able to turf clear. We used a small machine for some of it to turf strip, and Breckland Floral Group unusually did a bit of hand stripping work. They came along. There's Rob Dyke trying to creep out off the photo without getting caught, but he didn't succeed. And then Tessa and I went and counted it in the autumn 2020, and to our absolute delight, the red flags mark flowering plants, of which we found 85, the white ones non-flowering, 303. Massive response. And the estate, the plant grows along the verges all around the estate, and it's been designated a county wildlife site, which means its management is changed. And instead of being constantly trimmed, these plants have now got a chance to grow. Hence, that's the plant you can see bottom left. Tess said, it's the first time I've seen it flower in 10 years. And one of the important things about this, apart from to benefit the plant, is that wormwood moonshiner beetles, a very rare beetle, likes to feed on the seed of wormwood, of field wormwood at night, hence its name. So we went and counted it after dark, and to our delight, we found over 100 across the area of the industrial estate. A fantastic result. I think I'm right about that. So a huge increase, and local firms have supported the action and been really supportive about it, and they've put their names, their logos on the interpretation board that we're doing there. So we've also done bigger scale work, and this is done with Wren funding, and it's at Barncross Common, right on the edge of Thetford. So very accessible to a lot of people who live in Thetford, particularly at the moment. It's very valuable. It's a site which always was very special for Brecks plants, but it had got very overgrown with coarse vegetation and scrub, and a lot of the heathland was getting lost. And one reason was the lack of grazing. So to get the grazing back, the fencing may not be the most exciting bit of the bottom left-hand picture, but that is the mechanism for the management of the site. So it was, if you look at the picture above that one, this is the kind of state it was in, loads of coarse, long grass, no chance for the more delicate special flora, invertebrates and so on, no bare ground in which they could grow. So now they're able to put cattle on. You can see the vegetation is much, much shorter across a lot of area. And they also did some turf stripping and creating some bare ground. And that had an immediate response in the numbers of tower mustard. This, again, one of the Brecks specials. It's not only in the Brecks, but Brecks is a stronghold for it. And you got, in 2016, Tessa and Carol, who are in the top photo, counted 30,000 plants of tower mustard. I think it nearly killed them, and that was their first year with the Breckland Flora Group. Ian Woodward has taken that on, and he's counted 9,000. Very interesting. You'll see the numbers have dropped massively as the cattle have gone grazing it. And this is one of the things you've got. Tower mustard actually responds really well to disturbance, and then its numbers dwindle. And what you've also got is the cattle are eating it. So you have to balance. You're not going to get the mass numbers, but you are going to get quite a lot of them. And other species are going to get a chance because the vegetation is much shorter. But because we've got people out there counting the plants, we can keep an eye on it and make sure that the tower mustard and others don't disappear entirely. Purple stem cat's tail, really lovely grass, has actually responded really well. And there are now the good numbers of smooth cat's ear as well. And maybe as the vegetation gets shorter and there's more disturbance, hopefully Breckland thyme might come back. And we've done an introduction of perennial norwal as well on one of the turf stripped areas. So that was an example of much bigger scale conservation. And then here's one that's built on relationships. The Breckland Farmers Wildlife Network has got going in the last 18 months, but it's been about 10 years in the germination of it, the seeding of ideas, the growing, and then suddenly it's gone boom. And now 50 farms are part of it. It's absolutely massive. And they are determined to turn things round for wildlife in the Brecks. And we have been incredibly fortunate that they come to us for advice on flora. And it's been an absolute joy to be involved. Currently, they're working on introducing and linking up cultivated margins. And we stand on the side chipping in where we can be useful. And I think probably one of the most important things that I've done is John Secker, one of our Breckland Flora Group members, has been managing margins on the farm where he works at Feltwell since 2012. There he is on his Harrow tractor. And in the process, he's become an absolute expert. His margins are shining examples of what it's possible to achieve. So John took these photos. These are all the same margin. This margin was intensively cultivated for the last 50 years. He says John knows because he's lived in the same place all this time. It's always been cultivated with crops like wheat, barley and so on, up to 2012 when the farm went into high level stewardship and John was put in charge of the cultivated margins. And because John is a brilliant naturalist and because he understood farming, he knew how to make them work. So I got him, he was describing to me how they change colour over the season. I got him to take a photograph. So the top left one is the margin in April, then going right to early May, bottom left, late May, full of prickly poppy, and then bottom right, July. Think of the food source they provide for invertebrates. He has a margin that's full of grey carpet moths, a really special moth for the Brecks, and great seed source for birds. And I put John in touch with one of the main coordinators of the Breckland Farmers Wildlife Network, and they are now going to run a workshop when COVID allows for farmers to learn from him how he achieves these kind of results. When Richard Evans, the coordinator, went to see these margins, he was just blown away, and also by the number of turtle doves that are singing in this area, which is astonishing. So they're going to work with him, and we work closely with Richard Evans, one of the founders of the network, and his dream, he said at a meeting, let's create margins like these from Bury to Swaffham, from the fen edge to the eastern side of the forest. Let's have seamless populations of turtle doves across the Brecks and all the other benefits and ecosystem services that come with healthy habitat. So working with them complements so well our relationship with Norfolk Wildlife Trust, Suffolk Wildlife Trust, Butterfly Conservation, Natural England, the forestry. It's joining up all those on whose land we work. So back to the Veronicas. Here at Wheating, they're flourishing under a crop of an old-fashioned breed of rye, which is sparsely planted in comparison with modern crops where no light gets through. And James, the warden at Wheating, has in different years counted more than 1 million of fingered speedwell and something like 600,000 and then many more of the spring speedwell. And we really want to establish other fields like this on the poorest ground. The great thing about Brecks flora is it doesn't want good ground, special ground, it wants the poorest possible ground. I've been learning across this time so much about the Brecks and about Brecks flora species and what makes things tick. I've also learned so much by looking really closely at populations of a particular species growing at different places and then adding it. It's like doing a jigsaw from the records made by so many who've gone before. Tim Pankhurst, my boss, has been working on these species for years, and yet there are always new questions, new understandings, the harder that we look and think. And Plantlife gains so much by having the experience that Breckland Flora Group members bring to the group, whether their knowledge of the Brecks, particular species, different taxa, or ways of thinking. Conservation is so urgent, yet a great deal of research and thinking is required before action is taken to make sure that that action is sustainable in the long term. And our relations with all those who live and work in the Brecks is vital to a success. And it's people who support Plantlife who make this work possible. by giving, you enable us to be here doing this work, which brings spring speedwell and other species like it in the mind's eye. And I think like that bit of heaven growing on earth. So thank you to everybody who's, you know, contributes and work with us. And I'm also grateful to all the people who provide me with stunning photos to share with you all. So that's a bit of a glimpse of what we do in the Brecks.
Hi, Jo. Thank you for such a fascinating talk. I was really interested to hear about the work you've done with the industrial estate and how the businesses wanted to put their logos on the sign. And that's a real kind of sign of success there, which is brilliant. So if we go straight into questions, I've already had a few come in. The first one is, you mentioned quite early in your talk about how the rabbits have disappeared in the Brecks. And a few people wanted to know why the rabbits' numbers or population has gone down so much.
Yeah, I mean, Mixie everybody knows about from the 1950s, and that always was cyclical, and you know, you'd see it come and go, but rabbits were surviving that. And it's viral hemorrhagic disease and viral hemorrhagic disease Mark II. And the difference with that, why it almost happened invisibly, is that the rabbits die underneath the ground. So it was just like they just went, and you didn't see it. With Mixie, you see the sick rabbits. So yeah, it was very striking that it was just over a couple of years. Now, and the odd thing is that there are still some sites left where you've still got rabbits. So I went to Lackford Lakes is one, the Suffolk Wildlife Trust. They've got a good population of rabbits, as the people who live in Lackford will bemoan because they don't have a hope in their gardens. And yesterday I was out at a spring speedwell site where there was signs that rabbits were there, but there's nothing like the numbers there were, and it's a real problem. And one of the things they've been doing through Shifting Sands is trying to build it back. But we think they're probably hopefully beginning to build up again. And
is there a population of hares there as well?
Oh, the hares are fantastic. Yeah, there are. But they don't do the same. They're good for grazing, but they're not quite so good for Brecks floor. They don't create the same, they don't do the same scraping of the ground and the disturbance.
We've had a couple of questions about one of your photos, which is the field margins. So I don't know if you can share that slide again and go, it's the third one from the end.
Yeah, certainly can. Hope you're not going to ask me all the different species in it.
I am, I'm afraid. Someone wanted to know what the pink flowers in the margins were.
Ah, fumitory. Yeah, fumitory. So, and that's one that provides really good seed for turtle doves.
And Rob Lucking asked, can you tell me what soil type John Secker's margins were on?
Chalky.
Chalky soil.
Yes, and I should say none of these are planted. This is all natural. And John will say that first of all he had to sit through a couple of years where all he got up was fat, hen and thistle, while the sort of nutrients in the ground leached away, and hold on to his nerve, and then gradually they started to come through, and each year he sees something different.
Sarah Barfoot asks, the success of the sparsely planted rye enabling the speedwell plants to flourish is great to hear for the wildlife, but what are the benefits to the farmers in this scenario?
The benefits is HLS money if they want to get it. The other benefits is, I mean, why the Brecks Farmers Wildlife Network are so committed is they want a functioning ecosystem, because they realise that it's only if they have insects and pollinators and so on and clean water that in the end that their agriculture will be functional and their soil will be functional. So they see it as a kind of mutual thing and also part of their stewardship of the land. I think that would be a fair explanation.
I've got a question about muntjacs. Are they a destructive influence as well in the Brecks?
I think in the forest they are very much there, but we don't have that. I don't think it's much of an issue from the point of view of our specific types of flora.
Okay. We have a question from Sophie Flux. Do you have a protocol for contacting industrial estates to promote plant life? She's based in Risby, just on the edge of the Brecks.
Oh, based in Risby.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear, because, well, no, what literally we did was visit each unit and with a letter and a flyer saying what we did to begin with, and repeated that sort of several times, and then sent letters to the landowners and so on, and built up a relationship that way. But it was hard work. I wanted a list, you know. I didn't get a list of just easy way of contacting people.
We have a couple of questions about margins, how to get farms involved in margins, and how are margins managed as well. I'm guessing that's come under the stewardship agreement.
Yes, you can get your margins in the stewardship agreement. And I mean, one of the things in the Brecks is we're promoting cultivated unsown margins. So the margins are ploughed and then left and not sown, so that the native flora can grow. But that's particularly suitable for the Brecks. I'm very much talking about the Brecks at the moment.
The next question I have is, if the vegetation and species composition is soil and climate driven, what was it like before the rabbits were introduced?
I know, that's just such an intriguing question. I think that everywhere was much poorer, and possibly there were more big mammals walking around and grazing. But what was creating that disturbance? I think we just hadn't had the build up of nutrients that we've got now, which has, you know, turned heathland really a different colour, made it green, whereas before it would have been very sandy. But I keep thinking that's a very intriguing question, was what was going on before the rabbits. And I don't know. If anybody does know, I'd really like information on that.
I have a question from Sue, and she lives in the Brecks and has some land in the Brecks, and she would like to know what she can do to help rare Breckland plants. For example, would she be able to be used as a nursery for bringing on species to introduce them back into the wild?
Oh, that's really useful. Perhaps she'd like to email me. That would be great. And then we could talk about possibilities further.
And at the moment, that's the last question we have on our Q&A. See if a few more come in. Oh, here we go. Why is there so much non-flowering field wormwood? So on your slide, I think on one of the survey years, there were lots of non-flowering field wormwood compared to flowering.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. One is when it's not doing well, it doesn't flower. So I think it was because I looked at it really closely and studied it over the months, and it wasn't it. Well, and actually, I covered some of the non-flowering plants to check that it wasn't being grazed off by anything, and it wasn't. It made no difference at all that they were protected, and it wasn't slugs, because I could have told slug damage. So I think they were just under too much pressure to flower, and the new plants take 5, 6 or 7 years to flower sometimes, we think. We also are learning more about the ecology of it, because we used to think, you know, one plant was one plant. We now think that possibly there are lots of branches, you know, underground roots, and that some of what looks like a separate plant may well be a branch grown underneath, you know, from another plant. So it's much more complicated than we thought. But the problem is, because it's so rare, it's a Schedule H species, so we can't go around digging it up to have a look at how its roots are doing. So in fact, what we are doing is we've got some plants in cultivation, so that we can try and see what's happening with them and understand it better.
That was a question I was going to ask, which you've hinted at, with the eight species. What protection or international recognition do they have on them?
Yeah, so some have got Schedule 8, but not many have got Schedule 8, and then they're recognised as Red Data Book or nationally scarce or nationally vulnerable, and then they're protected by being in triple SIs, really, is their main protection.
And will their seeds have been collected and stored in a seed bank for the future, or?
We've been working on that with Kew recently, and unfortunately COVID stopped us doing it, because particularly Jessie Timberlake of Natural England, who's part of the Breckland Floral Group, was leading on that, and we were going to try and make sure that we had systematically worked with Kew to make sure that seeds had been collected. We did spring speedwell and fingered speedwell in 2019.
That's fantastic. Okay, I haven't got any more questions coming in on the Q&A. I'll just check the chat as well. Oh, I've gone very dark, sorry. I don't know what's happened there. We've had lots of people saying thank you. It's been a really interesting talk. We've had some people coming from all over the country, so from Cornwall as well as right on the other side of the country, which is brilliant.
Oh, that's lovely. I mean, one thing things people ask, because I did a talk at one today as well, and they said, where can we go to see these flora? So it's made us think that we will put on our website, this won't be immediate, but perhaps a list of good places to go and visit to see the plants that can be seen on the sites that are open, and to give people a chance to see them, because there are some lovely sites.
I have had just another question come in. What is the arable crop that is mainly cultivated? And I'm assuming across the Brecks, is there a particular crop that's cultivated there?
You get sugar beet, and you get potatoes, carrots, parsnips, onions is big, and then they will do winter wheat in between, to provide the rotation, winter wheat and spring barley. And increasingly there's biofuel and maize for biofuel.
And someone has asked, are there any results from the experiments at Cranwich Camp? Sorry if that's not how you pronounce it.
Oh, I wonder which experiments. What does it say?
It doesn't have any more, so they might pop in a bit more detail, but are there any results from the experiments at Cranwich Camp?
Cranwich Camp, they turf stripped some areas for Spanish catchfly, and the result has been fabulous. I mean, I can't remember how many years that's been done now. It might be 10 years, but the population across the turf stripped areas is amazing. It's gone up from, I'm not good at remembering numbers off the top of my head, but a few to thousands. And the nice thing about the turf strip is it's keeping really, really bare. So, it's sustaining itself, which is good.
Brilliant. We've also had people from New Forest and Scotland. So a fantastic range of different people.
That's really exciting. And it makes such a difference that people, I think one of the other things that will make a difference to Brecks flora conservation is people being interested, and that will be the same for any flora across the country, really. Because as soon as our politicians know that we're interested, then they'll sit up and start taking notice. And I think there's beginning to be a huge wave of that, isn't there?
Yes, it's become, I think COVID has really helped people become really aware of what's on their local patch. At Plantlife, we've had so many queries, haven't we, in the last year about local plants.
And it's been really exciting to be able to share that with all of you, to share this. It's lovely to talk about it.
I've had another question here. So would turf stripping be an interesting approach elsewhere to see what turns up?
I would be reluctant to speak about it elsewhere, because like in the Fens it wouldn't, you know, the areas are so different that I think you have to think really carefully about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So I can't answer that for a different place.
Will the recently allowed use of neonicotinoids in sugar beet affect your work? It's quite a topical question.
Yeah, that's interesting. If it affected the pollinators, then it could affect these margins that we're looking at the moment, which I have to emphasize is not my work, that's John Secker's work. I don't know. I don't know what the response is on that. I don't know enough about it to comment.
Great, okay. I think that is all of our questions for this evening. So thank you very much, Jo, for that fascinating talk and being able to answer all those questions that we fired at you. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. If you are interested in any more of our Plantlife Spring into Action talks, we do still have a few spots available on some of the other events. So please do go to our website at Plantlife and look on the events, because I believe there's a few more spaces on some of the other talks coming up as well. Some people have asked in the chat how they would be able to see this talk. It has been recorded and it will be on the Plantlife YouTube page. So you'll be able to see it right from the beginning if you joined us a little bit later as well. And all of our webinars that have been recorded are being put there. So you'll be able to see some of the other talks that we have had as well. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming and being with us this evening. And Jo, did you have any final comments you wanted to add?
I think I'm just so aware that the work that I'm doing is sustained. I'm ever so lucky to be doing it and think that I'm going to be able to sustain it. And that's because of the support we get from Plantlife members and anybody who donates to us. It makes such a difference to be able to stay in an area for quite a time and really build this work. And yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So I think that just leaves us to wish you all a very good evening, and thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you ever so much for coming. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.